Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives, your families, and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
To wake up, there is one way. Fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hi, Eleanor.
Eleanor.
Hi,
Eleanor
Eleanor.
Mueller.
You're just looking cute as a plum today.
What do you call the leader of the rebellion when she's cold?
Cold Mothma?
Mon Hothma. That's a double Star Wars pun, baby. Welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, a podcast.
About Star Wars and politics sometimes, and also
History, gay stuff.
the ongoing...
Gay history and politics. I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller.
I'm your less host, Sophia Dunstan.
Sophia, what's a politic?
Politics is the exercise of force. Max Weber, read it and weep.
In its most abstract form, right, politics is a conversation about what power is and how it is used, you know, how force is meted out. And capital P politics is just that. It is a conversation, and it takes place through documents, through speech, through conversation. And the thing about politics in Star Wars is that we don't have any of that.
There's no, letters from a Birmingham jail, but Star Wars.
Yeah,
because
letters
no one
from
wants to write...
Sunspot Prison.
Sure.
Well, yeah, even when you have something like that exists, and when an RPG sourcebook wants to add credible political context to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, you mention the Raxus Address, but we don't actually have excerpts from the speech itself. So supposedly seminal works of galactic law, national charters, political theory, all of that stuff are basically just flavor text. And that's because a lot of the time we're talking about story context. It'd be kind of boring and off topic to stop the story about shooting stormtroopers and talk about the political philosophy behind that. But also, I'm sorry, that's what we're here for. That's what this podcast is about. And so we have to take what we can get when we get it. When we know these sorts of essential political documents in Star Wars, it changes the way that we can view these galaxy-spanning conflicts. If we knew what the Galactic Constitution said, we would have this whole new lens through which we could view the legality of the Separatist cause.
I'm sure it would be just like a horribly Byzantine document, though, with how old the Republic is.
It would not be good. It would be annoying, but we could complain about it on this show, which is why it would be awesome to have it in a reference book.
Set George Lucas to work. He has nothing to do anymore.
George Lucas is off enjoying his life with his wife and stuff.
Boring. I expect him to spend his time writing the Constitution of the Galactic Republic.
George Lucas's understanding of politics is not... I would not want to see
I didn't say it had
what...
to be good. The American Constitution is not always good, but we have it anyway. Because our founders, people, were not, as smart as everyone makes them out to be.
So what examples of in-universe political texts we have are precious and worth talking about? And that's what we're going to do today. We've got a couple of texts.
Quotation marks surrounding that word.
Real quick, a little bit of galactic context. So, by 5 BBY, the planet Gorman saw intense restrictions on its shipping lanes by Imperial rule, heavily affecting necessary supply chains, which effectively starves the planet. We don't really know why these lanes were cut off. It's possible that the anti-imperial actions of a group called the Gorman Front incentivized the collective punishment of the planet. That is my own guess, which is based on what very little we know about Gorman. But, it would fit, and it would have some very real-world resonances. Free Palestine. But eventually, in 2 BBY, Gorman civilians engage in a peaceful demonstration to protest the deadly embargo on their world, which is a protest that ends when Imperial troops open fire on the civilians in an event we know of as the Gorman Massacre.
Wow, this is clearly not derivative in any way of anything.
Chandril and Senator Mon Mothma was a long political opponent to shipping lane restriction to Gorman, as well as an opponent to the Emperor in general. And after the massacre, she went in front of the Senate and spoke out against Palpatine directly. directly. To quote her, she says, "I name the Emperor himself for ordering the brutal attack on the people of Gorman. This massacre is proof that our self-appointed emperor is little more than a lying executioner, imposing his tyranny under the pretense of security. We cannot allow this evil to stand." She says this in the Senate.
Balls.
And then she survives. She makes it out. She escapes the ISB. She makes it off of Coruscant. She's spirited away by members of a couple of different rebel cells that she's probably funding at this point. And after this, Mon Mothma made a wider statement, a message to rebel cells and the galaxy, declaring the Rebel Alliance as an allied collective of hitherto tenuously connected anti-imperial forces under the banner of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. The Alliance formed more definite governmental and military structures, and they developed the clear need for a more formal proclamation of the Alliance in order to lay out its purpose, its arguments, and its goals. Thus, the Declaration of Rebellion was born. And thank God, that's something that exists. We can read it. The Declaration of Rebellion is written as this way to legitimize the rebel cause in essentially political terms. So they're not just like doing terrorism more.
But doing terrorism is fun.
But the galactic public might
not like terrorism.
Yeah.
As it turns out.
Listen, when all your organization is some dudes that show up every now and again and bomb an imperial parade, you might need a little bit more PR. All right, Declaration of Rebellion. Let's go. We, the beings of the Rebel Alliance, do this day send forth this declaration to His Majesty the Emperor, and to all sentient beings in the galaxy to make clear to all the purposes and goals of this rebellion. We firmly acknowledge the importance and necessity of the institution of galactic government. We accept that all must subjugate themselves to that government, giving up certain rights and freedoms, in return for peace, prosperity, and happiness for all. We believe that the galactic government derives its power and right to rule from the consent of the governed.
They really just had like a first-year political science intern write this, didn't they? You just hit all of the like political theory crap you have to learn in your first year.
Yeah, we're doing
like, oh, social contract theory, that's a thing. Did you know consent of the governed is important?
Right, we're doing
democracy.
We're doing the American Declaration of Independence. We're doing just powers from the consent of the governed.
This is just a Declaration of Independence but space, isn't it?
It varies a little bit, but yeah, pretty much. No, the Declaration of Rebellion also takes some stuff from the American Constitution.
Yeah, America.
Star Wars is a fundamentally American work, for better and for worse.
God bless.
Anyway, yeah, this consent of the governed idea is governmental legitimacy is derived from the consent of the people. Again, it's pretty basic political science stuff. And that, conversely, government that isn't consented to is unjust and illegitimate. What counts as consent may vary depending on what school of philosophy you ask. Whether it's like tacit consent, where you, just by staying put you consent, or you have to give explicit, enthusiastic consent. Can you really consent to a certain type of governmental system if that's pretty much all of your options? I don't know. The idea of a just government requiring the consent of the governed is itself inherently an anti-colonialist one. Colonialism being the domination of one people over another via occupation and exploitation. And depending how correct you are, you might say that it's an anti-capitalist idea, that the ways in which your boss or the people at the top of your company, the way they have sovereign decision-making power is inherently anti-democratic and unjust. Consent of the governed is also an inherently anti-slavery idea.
Which might raise some alarms to people familiar with the country formerly known as the United States of America.
The guys writing the Declaration of Independence sure did write a Declaration of Independence.
They sure did say that freedom is good and then ignore everything they said.
Back to Mon Mothma. We believe that, should the rights of free beings be willfully and malignantly usurped, it is the unalienable right of said beings to alter or abolish said government.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with one another, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
When the Empire's a dick, you have to shoot some stormtroopers.
True.
Basically. This unalienable right idea is, I mean, it's liberalism. We're doing liberalism. And that's not, Joe many liberals does it take to screw in a log by bulb liberalism. It is, perish the thought, classical liberalism. People, at least certain people, have natural rights, John Locke shit.
Rousseau shit,
etc. It's your just government is built on top of and to protect these natural rights of people. Usually a specific
to you by God.
Yeah, usually a specific group of people. John Locke was horribly
He
racist.
was in this, you gotta, understand that he was in the 1600s. Everyone was horribly
where
racist.
all of the white people were horribly racist, I know, but...
And now, if you're a liberal, you're like, those things apply not just to white people, but actually to all people.
My point is it's worth saying...
Except for poor people.
Hey, when we're building political systems on top of 400-year-old political philosophy, it's worth mentioning that, hey, this guy might be a little bit racist.
Okay, well, if we're gonna do that, let's also mention the whole anti-capitalist thing was invented by a certain guy who held some views about, quote, barbarous nations.
Totally. Fuck that guy. Whomever he could be.
That guy, trademark.
Me deleting the Karl Marx contact in my phone. Moving on. We believe that the Galactic Empire has willfully and malignantly usurped the rights of the free beings of the galaxy, and therefore it is our unalienable right to abolish it from the galaxy.
During the period of imperialism after the February Revolution, when power passed into the hands of the cadet bourgeoisie, naked politics, incitement gave way to a policy of cowardly distrust of the various peoples of Russia. That is from the Declaration of the Rights of the Peoples of Russia, written by Lenin and Stalin. Good guys. Well, one of them was.
The only time we'll mention Lenin in this episode. So, we know the Empire. The Empire is dicks.
Nazis.
The Empire is Nazis. The Empire is the most imperialist
Ever.
caricature of the United States of America. And when the Empire is doing bad shit, and if people have a natural right to freedom and property and whatever the hell else John Locke said, then you have the right to shoot some stormtroopers. John Locke said that.
Yeah, I believe that one was in his 1684 work on the stormtrooper. Or we can take it back to the early days of political and religious thought when they would just write against whoever person they didn't like and make that the title of their book.
Those are the best titles.
Against Palpatine.
Moving on. We do not take this course lightly. Governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. But when a government displays a history of usurpation, abuse, and moral atrocity, displaying a clear design to subjugate totally and absolutely beings born free under the auspices of nature, here we're doing natural rights. We're doing it again. It is our right, our duty to depose of that government. Here we're seeing one of the fundamental truths
The force-given rights of all intelligent beings.
We're seeing one of the real truths about the Alliance that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, is that they are, within the universe politically, a conservative movement. They are the Alliance to restore the Republic. It's a one-off line by Saw Gerrera in Andor, but he mentions the Neo-Republicans, and that is the dominant ideology of the Rebel Alliance, is this return to the Republic. And we see that's what Mon Mothma's from. That's what she worked for decades.
Just graffiti all over the galaxy with just RETVRN with a picture of the Galactic Republic ensign. It's better than the Empire.
Well, it is better than the Empire, but I mean, the New Republic does fail. It falls apart. And we could have a conversation about whether or not it was possible to keep it together at all. But there are potential limits to this idea that what came before is what needs to be preserved and worth bringing back. The Republic did fall. The Empire is born of the Republic, despite their propaganda.
One can even say that the Galactic Empire is not so much a replacement for the Galactic Republic as a somewhat more authoritarian evolution of its already existing institutions.
That is pretty much essentially what it is. You're just stacking Palpatine-era political doctrine on the structures of the Republic, basically. Much wider militarization, and some of the governments is slightly changed the way that Palpatine institutes sector governance. We talked about that in episode 1. But, we talked about Compnor. Compnor is just kind of a retrofit of the Republic-era Compor. Oh, it's a worse name. Compnor is a better name. We know about...
I just added one letter.
Yeah. The history of the present Galactic Empire is of repeated injuries upon its members, with the direct objective of establishing you, Emperor Palpatine, as an absolute tyrant over the galaxy. Again, we're doing Declaration of Independence.
This is listing all the grievances, because they're just for cutting off all trade with pot. Oh, wait, that's a wrong accent.
Why are you doing
I was trying to do an old colonial accent, it just became German.
Directly addressing the monarch that we don't want to be under, and we're making a list, which, let's be clear, is a decent way to do an argument. You have your logos, you have your pathos, this. Here's my argument. Here's why it matters. Here is my evidence.
Here's why you're a bitch, Palpatine.
Firstly, Mon Mothma names the disbanding of the Senate as a grievance against the Empire. And I do want to pause here. I think this line is a possible discrepancy in the Declaration. So the book Propaganda may imply the Declaration of Rebellion as being from Mon Mothma's broadcast, wherein she resigns from the Senate after the Gorman Massacre. We talked about that earlier. But this can't be the case because it has to be during or after the events of A New Hope, since here it names the dissolution of the Imperial Senate as a rebel grievance.
I would have imagined that this is the sort of thing you would issue after, like, blowing up the Death Star, like after the first kind of big confrontation.
The Declaration of Rebellion is a Legends to canon transplant. The canon version is word for word the same as the original, except for the later use of the word racism in Legends is changed to speciesism in canon, just for greater accuracy. But in Legends, the Declaration was released before the Battle of Yavin in A New Hope. It was signed on Yavin 4. There's this art from Legends of the signing of the Declaration of Rebellion that is clearly the signing of Declaration of Independence, and it is in the rebel base on Yavin 4. So yeah, I doubt this is like oversight, including this disbanded the Senate line. My guess is that it was made at a later time. It would make a lot of sense for it to be really soon before or after the destruction of the Death Star, but we don't know. I would appreciate some clearer dating because as it stands, it is kind of messy. So the list of grievances is as follows. You have disbanded the Senate, the voice of the people.
He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
Convulsions within.
He's essentially saying that because the king wouldn't let them have legislatures, they are unable to govern.
Mon Mothma continues, you have instituted a policy of blatant speciesism and genocide against the non-human peoples of the galaxy. For context, this is when it says racism in Legends. It's a good change. It's tiny, but, worth doing. You have overthrown the chosen leaders of planets, replacing them with moffs and governors of your choice.
He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount of payment of their salaries.
What does that mean?
The king started appointing judges instead of allowing the legislature to do it, so he was effectively taking direct control over judicial and executive power in the colonies, which is what Palpatine is doing.
You have raised taxes without the consent of those taxed.
I think we all know that one.
Additionally, fun fact, so the Gorman Massacre was also something from Legends. The Gorman Massacre was during a protest in response to increased taxation on Gorman trade routes, instead of specifically embargoes as it appears in canon. In canon, it's gotten much more brutal, it seems like. Anyway. You have murdered and imprisoned millions without a benefit of trial.
For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. That is a really close ripoff.
You have unlawfully taken land and property. You have expanded the military far beyond what is necessary and prudent for the sole purpose of oppressing your subjects.
They're quartering too many troops on our planet.
We, the Rebel Alliance, do therefore, in the name and by the authority of the free beings of the galaxy, solemnly publish and declare our intentions. This part's based, for the record. To fight and oppose you and your forces by any and all means at our disposal, to refuse any imperial law contrary to the rights of free beings,
absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
It's not something we talk about very much besides ship names, but there is an empire that we don't really talk about within the context of imperial rule, because we talk about the Roman Empire when it comes to the fall of the Republic, and we talk about imperialist America when we talk about the Empire, but I don't know. The British Empire.
Turns out the British were also very imperialist and murdered people sometimes. Often.
Sometimes they did do that. We have this contradiction in Star Wars where it is a fundamentally American work where there's certain ideas about liberty and who fights back, as well as the Empire being America. The Empire is America.
Unless you're conservative, in which case the Empire is definitely the Nazis or Britain.
Or the Empire is Joe
votes.
Biden's Red Army. The Empire is very rarely communists. Not communists. They're never communists, but they are occasionally Soviet, specifically in the 90s.
In their most base moments.
And I have that on tape, everybody. Moving on. To bring about your destruction and the destruction of the Galactic Empire, to make forever free all beings in the galaxy.
We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Basically.
To those ends, we pledge our property, our honor, and our lives.
Oh my gosh, they really just ripped that off, didn't they?
Yeah. It is kind of based. I like that they named the racism inherent in the Galactic Empire.
The racial characteristic of the Galactic Empire is such that it is racist.
Yeah, but yeah, this is what the Declaration of Rebellion is. It's the Declaration of Independence with
Star
set
Wars.
dressing, yeah. And I don't know, I assume it does its job. It is meant to legitimize the Alliance in the eyes of what people and structures that they can. I guess it works. I don't know. They make a government out of it.
It's not a good one, but there is a government. Like, the freaking New Republic is like freaking Articles of Confederation America is what it is. Just like utterly incompetent, unable to do anything.
To be fair, that's what the Republic was when it ended. The New Republic wasn't always useless, we assume.
I mean, America wasn't always useless, and now it is, so in terms of governing itself.
I think that's worth pointing out is that the New Republic does last longer than the Empire.
Nice. Got Palpatine's ass.
There you go. Now we move on to my beloved, my boy, my personal gluppiest of shittos.
Oh, boy.
Caris
Do I need
Nemic.
to pull up the Communist Manifesto for this one?
No, because there isn't, whatever.
You know, Marx really does prove that, like, men just think about the Roman Empire all the time. Because he just brings it up. Like, he's just like, in ancient Rome, we have the patricians, knights, plebeians, and slaves.
Sophie, do you have any glup shittos? Do you have any C-list Star Wars characters that you're just a little bit too fond of? Like
I like
Poggle the
one guy
Lesser?
who gets his arm cut off.
Ponda Baba. Yeah, that guy.
Because he's just so random. He's just, like, so quirky. He just walks up to a guy and it's like, he's our autistic Star Wars king. He's just like, hey, I don't like you.
And then he gets his arm cut off. Obi-Wan escalates that situation way too far.
He was gonna pull a gun on Luke.
So pull out the lightsaber. Obi-Wan can deflect lasers. Obi-Wan
Not yet.
Obi-Wan removes his arm.
This is one of those things where you have to remember how canon was produced, and I don't think that lightsabers were intended to be able to deflect because you don't actually see it until episode 6.
Anyway, I'm just saying, in universe, Obi-Wan needs to chill the fuck out. Obi-Wan definitely goes to Shaoman's Cantina sometimes, right? Like, this is a place that he knows. He just goes there to cut some people's arms
Maybe
off
he
sometimes.
just doesn't like that guy. Maybe he is, like, of a mutual, like, I don't like you opinion.
He's been looking for any opportunity to take that fucking arm. So our show obviously has a lot of love for Andor baked into it. So we're actually going to talk about something from it because we kind of still haven't done that. We mention it offhandedly occasionally, but we're actually going to talk about an Andor thing. So Caris Nemic is a freedom fighter and an educated astronavigator, but more relevant to our show is his work as a political theorist and an idealist. Nemic was literally pitched as a Trotskyian character, Leon Trotsky being the founder of the Red Army, politician, theorist, etc.,
He
etc.
is kind of Trotsky.
Well, according to Andor showrunner Tony Gilroy, he says, if you're going to have Cassian ingesting all of the possible forms of conversion to the rebellion,
Stalin?
within specifically the narrative of the Aldani heist, Cassian is Stalin. The Aldani heist is lightly based on a specific instance of young Stalin robbing a bank that I am going to bring into maybe a whole ass episode later. Because I think it would be fun to just to talk about
I'm
that
really
story.
Interested, who's Lenin? Because, like,
no
Trotsky
one in
and-
Andor. I don't think we have our Lenin yet.
Damn.
I think we have to fucking search the phone book for our Vladimir Ulyanov, you know? That's a deep cut. No one's gonna get that joke. So yeah, the showrunner is basically saying you need a dialectic character to argue for the rebellion.
So he is a base communist then.
We've seen his hat. We know how he looks. No, I don't know. So the book 100 Objects suggests that Nemic's writing may have been so influential as to be able to name him as the first unifying leader of the rebel cause, which is exactly the sort of Nemic-centric take that I like, but I think is a little bit absurd. Because I assume the first unifying leader of the rebel cause is like...
Mon Mothma, maybe?
She could be.
Saw Gerrera.
The book cites Saw Gerrera, but, you know, someone like Sato or Dodonna or any of those people. But yeah, after its proliferation in the rebel spheres, what Nemic wrote was given the title The Trail of Political Consciousness.
Which, I must add, is the most, like, 1920s Marxist-ass name in existence. Like, yeah, I am Hans Luxemburgen, and I have created this great masterwork of political science and Marxism called The Trail of Political Consciousness.
It being called The Trail of
That is just like Angela Davis.
It's giving translated, right? Anyway, it's credited as exemplifying the intellectual climate that fostered the rebel revolt, which, yeah, certainly within the fiction, I mean, a Nemic gets Cassian to get up off his ass, so that's something. So the manifesto is described as a blueprint for dismantling Palpatine's empire, but his actual politics, Nemic's idea of how the galaxy ought to be formed, We don't know. We get 1, maybe 2 excerpts of Nemik's writing, of him talking about essentially craving a de-imperialized freedom, and that's kind of it. We don't see his ideas for a legal or governmental system. He could very well have them, but we have no idea. Essentially, what we have is an inspirational speech about the nature of resistance to authoritarian rule, which is cool. It goes hard as a rallying cry or whatever. It's a good way to get some rebels who might not be sympathetic to do something. But like, God, what I would give to hear what policy proposals Nemic would give, you know? If he hadn't had his spine crushed, what would he actually think of the New Republic? Is Nemic a neo-republicanist? I don't know. I would like to. Certainly, I doubt he would be. But that's the point, is we have no context because he dies.
I don't know. I feel like Nemic as like a political theorist who just does that would be really good.
It would be really deeply compelling for me specifically.
And a lot of people.
I think
Andor hit a nerve with a certain segment of the population.
a certain segment of our fan base.
That would be all of our fan base.
Yeah, but not all of them have seen Andor.
I feel like all of them have seen Andor.
I've got friends who listen to this podcast who haven't seen Andor.
How have you not seen Andor in the year of our Lord 2023?
It's only been out for a year, Sophie.
That's a long time.
A year as of this week. So, first, we've got a tiny little thing that Nemic says. He's described as writing a section of his manifesto that is titled, "The Role of Mercenaries in the Galactic Struggle for Freedom." He says, "Weapons are tools. Those that use them are, by extension, functional assets that we must use to our best advantage. The Empire has no moral boundaries. Why should we not take hold of every chance we can? Let them see how an insurgency adapts." He's basically saying you don't have to be a dyed-in-the-wool rebellion believer. It would be nice to have some guys to help us shoot stormtroopers.
True.
That's most of it. There's not a lot to it.
You can just sign up for the money and it's okay.
Yeah, Nemic is
Console is based, as it turns out.
Nemic is getting over his moral scruples about being pals with a mercenary. Okay, let's actually get to what little we hear of Nemic's largely untitled manifesto. It goes thusly. "There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction." Hey, look, it's the intro of our podcast.
I disagree strongly that freedom is spontaneous and occurs without instruction. The natural state of man, if I were to pull up some older theory, is not freedom, but tyranny. Tyranny to the person with the most power. So freedom does not just kind of occur in the absence of everything. Freedom is something constructed. Freedom is something we build for ourselves. Showing that I actually believe what Rousseau says, which is like really cringe. Basically, he has this idea where in the state of nature, as he calls it, humankind, if you will, is just violent and wants to kill each other. And in that state, there can be no freedom because there is no security, because every time you want to go do anything, you run the threat of just being murdered by your neighbor for like a goat. And so you create this thing called the state. You and other people work together to have the freedom to live your lives without facing certain fears. The idea that freedom is something that occurs spontaneously without instruction is a very great line, but not great political theory, in my opinion.
Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere. This is a recurring theme in canon lately. A spread in the visual guide Dawn of Rebellion is dedicated to highlighting disparate cells of resistance before their assimilation into the aptly named Alliance.
And this is something we really see a lot in like real world insurrections and revolutions as well. There's a reason that kind of counter-revolutionary or counter-guerrilla military action is so difficult, and that's because the irregular nature of the forces involved means that they can kind of just appear anywhere and everywhere and disappear, and you can't necessarily do anything to stop them. Like, I was watching for this politics and film class I'm currently in, this film called The Battle of Algiers, which is about when the French were trying to, fight to keep control of Algeria because various reasons, but they tried to cordon off the entire Algerian quarter of Algiers, which is the largest city and capital of Algeria, and it just didn't work because, as it turns out, with a conventional military force, you cannot control an entire population entirely against its will.
Well, and in Star Wars, people like Saw Gerrera's partisans or the Neo-Republicans we mentioned earlier, Galaxy Partitionists, whatever the hell Rex is up to, those are just the resistance organizations. That's not to mention whatever the fuck is going on Rada or Ferrix. And that's what's hard to keep down. That's what we see the Empire struggle to actually fight back against.
Right, and in that Battle of Algiers I was just talking about, eventually the French do succeed in killing off the cells of the Front Libération Nationale. They end up killing off the cells of that within the city. And they're like, okay, well, we've won. And then they send the paratroopers back, they send the tanks back to France, and everything goes back to normal for 2 years. But then, poof, the entire Algerian population of Algiers is on the streets and beats the hell out of the French. Because you can't just, you can't kill something like that.
So if you want to maintain control, you have to kill all the civilians.
There are ways of doing it where you can turn the populace against the uprising force, but that normally only works when the force that is trying to rise up is not in line with what the people want as a whole.
Which is kind of a roll of the dice, whether or not that's the case, right? Mm-hmm. It's just if fucky bad stuff happens within the organization itself.
You can probably say that the Taliban do not accurately represent the will of the majority of the Afghan people, and that is why the US and various Afghan allies were able to kind of keep them suppressed for 20 years without mass uprisings in the cities. And look, I'm not going to necessarily defend the US invading Afghanistan, but the Taliban are in fact bad.
I'm definitely not going to defend the US invading Afghanistan, but yeah, Taliban, not my favorite. I also think there are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted.
In an insurrection, in an uprising, kind of the everyday actions of ordinary people have a lot to do with its success, right? It's not the people who are extraordinarily valorous or are going to bomb cafes or whatever, spread the revolutionary message. It's the people who volunteer to hold on to one of the fuses for a day that make the success. It's logistics. It's always logistics in war.
Well, and it's built on top of this idea that, when you are ruling, you cannot rule alone. It cannot just be one guy calling the shots. It has to be people who are complicit or people who allow bad stuff to happen. And let's be clear, if you're getting imperialized, you're not necessarily going to be able to quote unquote fight back. But hey, there's only so much they can do when you're doing something. I also see these sorts of ideas from Nemic specifically as being kind of a tacit refutation of vanguardism. Where, vanguardism is this Leninist strategy wherein the most politically aware and educated socialist members of the working class basically organize with other non-working class socialists into a centralized party, which then works to introduce the wider working class to radical political ideas to bring them to the same aims and understanding. Their cooperation obviously necessary for a working class socialist revolution. The idea is considered misguided by a lot of people on the left. That's for multiple reasons. Naturally, the working class will vary in terms of political consciousness, but I think that within vanguardism lies a deeply unsocialist assumption, which is that pro-labor consciousness must be introduced to the working class from the outside, that it has to be incepted into them. Working class emancipation is the domain of the working class. It's not an entity outside of it. The idea of a vanguard party has been criticized for just not being an effective means of revolutionary action, potentially recreating the same class rule with workers on the bottom that they nominally aim to oppose. Back to Nemic. Even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our line forward. And then remember this. The imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that.
Tyranny in the way that he's thinking of it, of a state actively oppressing, tyranny exists in the state of nature, sure. The tyranny of the weak over the strong. But in an authoritarian state...
Authoritarian tyranny.
Yeah, the kind that you do with the state apparatus is extraordinarily fragile because you don't need that much for it to break up. All you need is one political elite to decide that he's going to plant a bomb in your conference room. Or 5 guys to meet in Le Fuck Cafe in Paris and start the French Revolution.
Okay. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority. And then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
Yeah, one thing is all it takes, right? I used to play this game called EVE Online, right? And back in the history of that world, there was this time when one of the most powerful, player groups was completely destroyed because one of the leaders ticked off another leader enough that he, stole all of the company's property, dissolved the entire alliance, and, they never recovered. So all you need is one thing, and one thing will pushes it over the edge. And, I'm critical, obviously, of armed insurrection as a strategy for overthrowing autocracy in general, because it generally just creates a different one. But if your goal is to get rid of the current regime, it works.
killing the guy on top does tend to make a different regime happen.
True.
And literally in Star Wars, what single thing breaks the siege is up to you. It could be Mon Mothma talking in front of the entire Senate. It could be the Ewok effort to destroy the Death Star 2's shield generator. It could be Luke Skywalker making a 1 in a million fucking shot.
You don't necessarily need the one thing that actually breaks the back of the enemy. You just need the one thing that pushes the general populace over the border into open insurrection.
Right, the butterfly flapping its wings so that on the other side of the world, a stormtrooper gets shot. Okay, this is where we run into a slightly unfortunate territory, which is the fact that we are talking about Star Wars. And the literal metaphysical fact of Star Wars is that there is a force for ontological definitional good that works towards that good. In Star Wars, the good guys will eventually win, kind of no matter what, which is not something that is provably true in the real world. My point is that there is not cosmic divine good in the real world that we can prove, quantify, and identify.
You can prove, quantify, and identify the Force exists because you can see a guy with a lightsaber.
Because you see Luke Skywalker lifting rocks, because you can find the midichlorians in Anakin Skywalker's blood. The Force is regrettably real.
Regrettably, do you wish it wasn't?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
But this is a difference when analyzing the political
Character of the world versus the political character of Star Wars.
Right.
Is that
the political landscape of Star Wars is that the good guys win.
Always.
Always. Eventually. And I mean, the arc of history will
bend towards justice.
You can claim that all you want, and yeah, I guess that's technically true, but you could also say that the arc of history will bend towards injustice and have your own little...
I think the arc of history does bend towards justice. It's just a lot slower in bending than we want it to be.
It's hard to take rights away from people.
Once they have them.
Yeah, and I think that's...
That's why everyone everywhere is always, like, even autocrats have to pretend to be democratic now because...
Right.
Because you just can't be openly non-democratic easily anymore.
Yeah, you have to be like...
just like, what the fuck is wrong with
you? Have to be like, we're not doing imperialism. We're not prejudiced against an ethnic minority. We're rooting out the Nazis, you know? That's what the autocrats do these days. That's what our favorite imperialists are up to.
I think that there is, like, some good in that. It's good that autocrats have to pretend to be democratic now.
Virtue signaling
because that introduces weaknesses to autocracy.
Virtue signaling has a political value.
Like, if you look at, Yugoslavia just before the fall, you had this real asshole named Slobodan Milosevic, and he was an autocrat. I mean, clearly, like, NATO bombed his ass for a reason. And because he had to pretend to have this democratic regime where, elections were obviously fixed and everything, yada, 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 but it laid the seeds for his eventual destruction because eventually the opposition managed to get so organized that they managed to win a completely rigged election. And prove that they had won it.
That's sick as hell.
And then the military recognized that, and Slobodan went to The Hague.
That's embarrassing.
And this keeps happening as well. It's happened in the Philippines. It's happened all over South America, where because you have to pretend to have these democratic institutions, because you have to pretend that you don't hate freedom, your people are just kind of able to unelect you by the force of sheer will. It's just like, what kind of happens when you have the pretense of democracy is that you might accidentally end up having one.
What is democracy if not the pretense of democracy?
True.
What is liberalism if not the pretense of liberalism? I mean, that's what the Declaration of Independence is, right? It's this, like, classically liberal document. It's painful to say, but it is nice to have it as a term, you know?
I just say capital L liberalism.
It is nice to write this classically L...
Classically L.
The Declaration of Independence is my favorite classical L. No, you have this liberal document that itself has been criticized for not being reflective of the intentions of the people who wrote it, but is now retroactively used to...
justify good things.
Right. To do actual liberal democracy. Or at least...
for now.
To argue actual liberal democracy.
This sort of document, to have it, is a really powerful tool for what you might call liberation, or I might call working for equality, whatever you want to call it, right? People have used this in the past to kind of argue that the liberal order should apply to everyone, right? You have Frederick Douglass saying, "I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn."
If it's not clear from context, this is a very famous speech delivered by Frederick Douglass.
On the 4th of July.
On the 4th of July.
What to the slave is the 4th of July?
if you have a Black civil rights leader going, this doesn't apply to me, and it should, you are making a liberal argument. And you have introduced the pretense of liberalism into the political landscape, into the ideological landscape.
Yeah, so, I don't know, it's good to have, like, aspirational documents as the foundation of your society, if you can.
All right, so the takeaway is do liberal democracy until you can do anarchy, and then, yeah, I don't know.
The takeaway is that it's good to have rights.
It is good to have rights. You know, that is kind of the main theme, is elemental rights. We're doing capital L liberalism. All right, let's move on to our emails. So this is from listener Liam Belson. They say, "Hello, Daughters of Ferrix. How are you? I am well. I recently started listening to your podcast and am enjoying it very much. I especially enjoyed the episode, Do You Think Anakin Liked Trains? As I am also autistic and have ADHD and am also Jewish."
We just, like, created the episode for you, didn't we?
You're welcome, Liam. So it touched on a lot of subjects personal to me. I'm also looking forward to when you discuss Mandalorians in relation to Judaism, as I think there are a lot of parallels there as well. Looking forward to hearing your next episode. Yours sincerely, Liam.
Thanks, Liam.
Thank you so much for mailing in. We are doing quite well, and we really appreciate it.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
We don't know how long they've been listening. Anyway, yeah, we really appreciate you dropping a line, and we're gonna do our best when we eventually get to talking about Mandalorian culture through that lens. That episode is probably a ways down the line, but we're looking forward to doing it. So yeah, thank you so much for emailing in, and we hope you keep listening further. All right. If you want to listen to new episodes as they release, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts, on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at FerrixPod. FerrixPod. New episodes release every other Wednesday. God, I work hard to get them out on time, so you can listen to them.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com. I have been Sophia Dunstan. You can't find me on Twitter anymore because it's a shithole, but you can find my other podcast there, at the redline_pod.
I have been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Our episodes are written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller, and Sophia Dunstan. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.